So now this is step 2, or part 2 rather, of the H2RC build series. This will be building the fuel cell onto the plate and to put onto the vehicle. So this is the main unit, the fuel cell, and this is the build plate that we'll build everything on. You can tell which side is the bottom and which is the top by the countersunk bits. The countersunk screw holes are on the bottom. So this is the top, this is the bottom. We'll first start off by mounting the fuel cell onto the build plate. One thing to keep in mind is that tolerances are pretty bad, so you're going to struggle a lot attaching this onto the build plate. So inside the miscellaneous baggie of screws, you will find a couple of countersunk screws. These 2 short countersunk screws are what you need. Slide it in right there. Grab your Allen key. And you can see right here is the screw hole that'll thread into. Do not tighten it all the way, because if you do, the other side you'll not be able to put in the other side. Keep it loose. There we go. Of course, when you're flipping it over, be mindful of the fans and the cables and everything. Do not damage anything. Once everything is tight, flip it over. To support the rear of the fuel cell, you will need these triangle brackets. The triangle brackets have an edge. This inner edge will be facing towards the center of the chassis. So as so, and get the other one, and as so. This will be a bit tricky, so in order to attach this, we use a nut, a squared off nut, and a button head screw, not countersunk, a button head. So in order to do this, this is very tricky. You gotta stick the screw. You gotta put the button head screw into this countersunk hole, right here, and it will be like so. And then what you do next is use the nut and secure that triangle onto the plate. Again, try not to tighten it down all the way because it may warp a bit and it may make it attaching your screws a bit difficult. As you can see, it's not perfectly machined, it's a bit bent. So it might get in the way a bit. Same thing on the other side. The open end is on the bottom. Again, be careful with the nut and okay. Now the next step is to get 2 more button head screws, like these, and screw these triangles onto the fuel cell. You might have to fold it again due to how bent the plate is. If you find that the screw isn't threading in properly, it might be due to simply the fact that the aluminum plate is a bit bent. So just bend it upwards a bit. There we go. This side has been started. If you find that the piece isn't screwing in properly, you might have to loosen the other components in order to get the screw to line up properly. As you can see, I'm experiencing lots of trouble right here. So I'm going to try loosening the bottom screw on the bottom end of that support to have it flex a bit more. Okay, it's a bit more loose. And it screws in now properly. Okay, now you can tighten everything back up. Okay, the fuel cell itself has now been attached to the base plate. Now, next step I'll do is get the two pressure regulators, these units right here. We will have to attach it to this end of the fuel cell unit. In order to do that, we're going to have to loosen up these clamps until it can slide in. It's a bit difficult to see, but as long as this inner edge is level with the metallic clamp, screw it in. That part will not move, so make sure it's reasonably tight. And again, this is a screwdriver with Phillips, not an Allen key. Be mindful of not accidentally over-tightening it and damaging it. It's the same process for the other end. There we go. So next step will be to attach these two solenoids. Here's how I will do it. This output solenoid I'll put on the bottom, right here as follows. And see how it has a plastic end? I'm going to make sure the plastic end is pointing towards the fuel cell. And this input solenoid, I'm going to make sure the plastic end is facing, again, the inside of the solenoid, of the fuel cell. So again, output solenoid is in the bottom, input solenoid will be on the top. In order to attach to the chassis, you use this bracket right here and two countersunk screw holes. It will be as follows. So you need to access the underside of the vehicle, of the chassis plate, and screw it on. I will set that to the side. Again, whenever you're maneuvering this, be mindful of all the cables to not damage it. Okay, keep it loose. There we go. Okay, it is loose now. So I will grab the output and put the output on the bottom with the plastic end facing the inside of the fuel cell. I'll grab the input side and keep the plastic end facing the fuel cell. There we go. The idea is for this to operate as a clamp. So once it's all positioned as how you'd like it to be, you clamp it down so that it stays in its place. Also, keep in mind to not accidentally do it too hard to risk damaging any of the components. There we go. That is good. So now all we got to do is plumb everything else. So what we got to do now is grab any of these silicone hoses and attach a silicone hose to this side of the fuel cell. Okay, that is on as it should be. Then you will attach this inline filter. Some of the stuff has to fit very tight, so you will have issues trying to get some of the components to fit together. Another thing is that you will have a lot of excess material, so cable management might be a bit of an issue and something you should keep in mind. Now we plug in another hose into the filter and plumb this into the input side, which is this solenoid, on the plastic side. There we go. This is properly done. And then the metal side, you'll have to put another silicone tube on it. And then this will be connected to a T-fitting, which is also included inside the package. Again, some of these fittings will be very tight, so keep that in mind. You will struggle. There we go. So now 2 more hoses, or 3 more hoses. There we go. There we go. And then we can get this pressure sensor and plug it onto the bottom side. The bottom side is this end right here. As follows. Again, be very mindful to not break anything. So be as soft as you reasonably can on the materials. Okay. Now we gotta do is the pressure sensors pressure switches right here have a collar. We need to first remove the collar, grab some tubing, attach the tubing, slide the collar over the tubing, and tighten the collar to secure the tubing. Same for the opposing side. And then we get the T-fitting and attach it to the T-fitting, like so. Okay, this side is done. Do the same for the opposing side. Okay. Okay, that is on. So you can tell it's looking a bit messy, but this is how it should look. So now, with the opposite side of the fuel cell end that we have not touched, this will be routed to the plastic end of the output solenoid, as so. And then the last final remaining tube will be plugged into the middle end. And the entire fuel cell has now been plumbed up. So now, remaining step is to attach this to the chassis, which is far easier than you might imagine. So what we need to do now is, there are 2 screws at the end of the chassis. These 2, there are 4 sets total. These 2 and these 2. We need to remove them. Oh, Jesus. One thing to keep in mind is that the screws front to rear are not the same. So do not mix them up. Okay. These 2 screws now removed. Grab the whole plate and put it onto the vehicle. These 2 screws should line up with the rear screws that we just take off, and the front plate should line up with the 2 screws we just took off too. One thing to also keep in mind is that since the plate is very bent, you might have some fitment issues. So keep it all loose until you can finally get all 4 screws in, so you can finally torque it down. Okay, good. Now for the front. Okay, so now final piece is to add this electronics board onto the vehicle, preferably onto the rear. But the rear does not have an even floor, so it'll be a bit difficult to attach it there. So what we use is this leveling plate. So this is a plate that was 3D printed that will be attached to the bottom right here in an effort to level out the floor and make it so that the plate, the electronics have an even floor to attach to. There we go. So now what we'll do is, see how it's a rectangle? Long ways should go as follows. Make sure it's evenly put onto the chassis and make sure it's not too close to the back end as to not interfere with the screws should you need to disassemble it again. Okay, grab your electronics board, or rather case, and then use the Velcro to attach it to the vehicle. Now we gotta grab the ESC and attach it using tape to the chassis of the vehicle, to the electronics box. If any of it is too loose, feel free to tighten it. Okay. Now we gotta plug up the electronics box to the fuel cell, as follows. Oh, one thing to keep in mind is that see how the electronics box has something called battery? The battery will no longer be plugged directly into the ESC, but rather into the electronics box. And then the electronics box will be plugged into the ESC from there. And then this switch will be plugged into this cable right here. There we go. Now the final remaining step is to attach the hydro sticks, which are included with your vehicle. These two. So in order to attach these, you slide them through, and you gotta screw them onto the connections right there. If your hydro stick is charged, you might hear it purging. That is normal. That simply is because the hydro sticks are full of hydrogen and the system is being filled. And that concludes the chassis assembly with the fuel cell. In order to test, turn everything on. And as you can see, the full vehicle is operational. Feel free to do some adjustments in case you had issues with some parts. Say, you can attach this using a zip tie right here to the unit right here. And of course, kill management might be a bit of an issue because there's a lot of wiring to keep that so keep that in mind. But the vehicle is now fully assembled, and it's now operational as a hydrogen vehicle. Feel free to mess with it further and do whatever you need.